So you're not really in the picture with me. Listen. I guess you are.
Read on all of them.
All right, so I'll go live.
Still got us. You want to tell them to go to mine if it breaks, or
go to
Lewis Everett 3 at Lewis Everett 3 if it.
Why would
if this cuts out? If our Wi-Fi goes out.
Okay. Do I have? What is that up there?
What? Oh, that's the lights behind us.
No, I mean the title.
What the heck?
Now I'm having to where I can't see. Okay.
Devil's working.
I know.
He doesn't work overtime. He just always works.
Yep.
It left out everything in between lies and production.
Yeah. Lies by omission.
And it didn't let me.
Yeah, no, that's what it was.
Come on. Actually put one in Weissman on my Facebook.
Oh, well, no biggie. We'll get started here in just a minute.
Luann, what's up?
I have to set up high for it.
Oh, I had it to where I was. Go.
That's not too. Oh, that's better. Sweet.
Started here shortly.
All right.
Let's go live on these.
Yeah.
I'm showing.
Can you
pull up your Wi-Fi stuff without messing with that?
Yeah. I'm just here. Wi-Fi. I'm on Lewis.
It says connected. Oh, now it's saying go live again. Oh, I set that. Still have nothing on mine. Now it's saying live.
All right.
Oh, it alerted me to you.
Okay, good.
Dropping in the bunker.
Oh, yeah.
Pat McDonald. What's up, guys? We'll just give it a few minutes.
Gonna give it
Some
a
folks
little bit
join.
for people to join.
We're on Facebook and Twitter. We got the book.
Hi, Janet.
What's up, Dan?
Hey, Dan.
Thank you for sharing.
Yes, thank you very much.
Let me get that note thing, and I'll use that one too. Yeah,
I
we saw
know.
that. We were talking about that earlier. Antifa going to defend some folks.
Is that 2 peas in a pod or what? Oh, sick. Move your camera. Your address is in the shot. Oh, uh-oh.
Oh. Well, stupid trolls don't come over here. It's not Yvonne's address, it's mine.
Better. Okay.
Cool. Thanks for the heads up.
Yeah.
It's a shame we have to do that. We have to say, don't put your address in there.
No. Because then you'll get like Antifa and the violent left coming after you. The tolerant left.
Neighborly used to be a word.
To allow
Yeah, I read that
Oh.
story. Library is closing for a day to allow a church to present Drag Queen Story Hour.
What? The Church of Satan?
It's what is it? I think it's called Open Church or something like that.
Might as well be. Oh, cool. Thanks for the super heart.
Very sick.
Yeah, that's just demonic, I think. We could
I guess we can go ahead and get
Go ahead and
started.
So this is our Ides Periscope we do every month on the Ides. It's on the 13th this month. We're doing it on Sidney Powell's License to Lie with a heavy focus on Andrew Weissman, since, for obvious reasons, he's involved in the Mueller report and everything that's going on now. But anyway, reading this book, I don't know, have any of you guys, have you read License to Lie? Dan? This book is a true story, but it reads like a novel, like it grabs you from the very first page. Because it starts out with, do you know about the Ted Stevens, the senator from Alaska, the prosecution of Ted Stevens, the conviction which was overturned? Weissman I don't think he was like directly involved, but he was in
Some of the folks, a lot of the same people that came from the Enron prosecution went to the Ted Stevens prosecution, and of course Weissman was the lead prosecutor and the special counsel.
Yeah. But anyway, that the book starts out with one of the prosecutors from the Ted Stevens debacle. He kills himself, and which is significant in and of itself.
Well,
I mean, he was a U.S. attorney.
He was a bad dude, but he was a lower echelon person in all of the bad dudes.
Yeah.
And he saw that the wheels of so-called justice were about to be turned on him.
Right.
And so he took the easy way out because he couldn't face it.
Yeah.
Stuff that he had done to other people in his career.
And it was interesting. Stevens. And then when the Ted Stevens thing came about, then under Weissman, there were some other attorneys that you've never heard of that were sent down there to take over. And they booted this Nicholas Marsh dude that killed himself later to third chair. So he wasn't even like one of the top dogs in all of the prosecutorial misconduct. But he was he got thrown under the bus, sacrificial lamb, and in the end. And it's not that he didn't deserve to be thrown under the bus, but there were other people higher than him that did worse things.
And so what we've got here is Yvonne has taken copious notes from the book. I read it about a year ago, and it's a lot fresher in Yvonne's mind, but we've got a lot of bullet points to hit real quick about who Andrew Weissman really is. And what we also want to emphasize is that Andrew Weissman is the author of the Mueller report.
Yeah, it's not Mueller.
Mueller is just the figurehead, the so-called saint, and Weissman's the one that ran this show, and he's the one that wrote this report. Mueller did his, you can't say best to defend it because he had his little short press conference, and in it he basically showed how scared he was. He said, "I don't plan on talking about this anymore to anybody.
Right.
Not going
Like he
before
doesn't
Congress
answer
or
anybody.
anything." So we've got a lot of hot points, bullet points to hit throughout this book, and it's freaking terrible. And it goes back to Enron, and we'll do some side notes about Weissman at the end. But we're just Yvonne's gonna start with these high points, not really high points, low points in this book.
All right. And basically the whole book, it demonstrates how, if you know what Brady material is, exculpatory evidence that can help a defendant in a trial. And over you'll see in the Stevens case and an Enron case. And of course, we're not even done with the Mueller report and all that this stuff. So who knows what kind of exculpatory information I think that we're fixing to find out, because I don't know if y'all know that Sidney Powell, who wrote this book, General Flynn has fired his previous representation,
attorneys.
And now he's hired. I don't know who else he's hired besides Sidney Powell, but that's a good sign. So anyway, this book demonstrates how our government, supposedly the best of the best attorneys, were going after and convicting people, and they withheld exculpatory evidence that would have cleared their clients.
Tons of it.
Yeah.
Can you still see us, Dan? We've been having some technical issues today.
Yeah, we got internet problems out here where my brother lives. So
No, he just
hopefully it won't go out.
Yep. All right,
Okay,
we're still
good.
going.
Anyway, so out here in Alaska, they went after Ted Stevens. Was it 40 days before the election? And this is a big deal because even though Ted Stevens, okay, he was tried and convicted, and then he had his conviction overturned. But let's look at, the good people actually lost on this, because not only did Ted Stevens lose his Senate seat that he had for 40 years, it overturned the balance of power in Congress.
Yep.
Don't you think that was their goal in the first place?
Talk about meddling in elections.
Yeah, that's totally meddling in elections. But so anyway, I'm gonna come back to the Ted Stevens stuff, because actually the Ted Stevens trial, that kind of stuff, it overlapped with the Enron scandal. The Enron scandal began before Ted Stevens. But anyway, the Enron, if you know, it was like the seventh largest. It's the seventh largest company in the world. They made like $20 billion a year. They had their hands in pretty much everything, and I've always wondered if they went after Enron. We've got a lot of corrupt companies out there, and for some reason the government turned on them. But I think this was one of those cases where Enron, they weren't acting right. Market forces showed up to
take them down,
and then they're like, never let a good crisis go to waste. And government jumps in, and instead of just going after the top people, the CEO was Jeffrey Skilling, and then the chief financial officer was Andrew Fastow. Instead of just going after the people that did wrong, they brought whole companies down, which brought a lot of jobs down. Seventh largest company in the world. They were even involved in like broadband and everything under the sun, which I didn't know that before I read this book. And Skilling and Fastow, they were how like you read these they're like murder, they'll have these murder mysteries on
ID channel.
Yeah, where certain people hook up with other people, and this happens in life a lot, where if two bad people hook up and bad things happen. And I think that's kind of what happened with Jeffrey Skilling and Andrew Fastow, because
they fed off each other, they had each other's back.
Yeah, and so they're successful. They've got their hand in everything, and Andrew Fastow had actually set up some
Bill and Hillary.
That's exactly true. They set up. So what Andrew Fastow did, the CFO, is he set up this other fund that was kind of running parallel to Enron. It was called LJM Fund, which was named after his wife and two kids.
Yeah.
And then that one was so successful that he set up another one called the LJM2 Fund, and it was like separate entities. It was like him having a $100 million piggy bank, and the Enron's board approved of him. So these other two companies had their own board, their own lawyers, their own accountants, and the Enron's board approved of all this, which they shouldn't have. Fastow had secretly created what he called the Raptors, especially to hide much of Enron's debt. So anyway, Fastow he's the one that came up with all these deceptive accounting practices that was hiding. So what they were reporting and what people saw in the markets was like it was priced 55 times
their earnings.
Yeah, their earnings. And then I think there was a magazine article in Fortune magazine that first brought to light their the truth of where he started seeing some things that was, March 2001, is Enron overpriced? So there's this article. Is Enron overpriced? And then, so that's March 2001. And then September 11th, 2001, not that much longer, and the stock market crashes, basically.
Yep.
And basically that sent Enron stock off a cliff. And so when that happened, they lost a lot of value in the stock market. People started getting nervous, and that's when the federal government starts taking notice. And so the federal government sets up an Enron task force.
So the Department of Justice comes in, they swoop in, and you've got the entire city of Houston was connected to Enron.
Yeah.
So many people lost their jobs. Incendiary business like restaurants and just everything, gym clubs, everything. People lost their jobs, people lost their businesses. So there's no way to get anything close to a fair trial
jury
in Houston.
Like not a single U.S. attorney based in Houston. They had to recuse themselves. They couldn't represent anything that had to do with it. They couldn't even be part of the investigation.
Yeah.
I don't think a lot of people know that with Enron. So Houston was hit bad. Like small businesses, all kinds of mom and pop stores closed because of it. People lost their retirement, but this was happening not just in Houston, but people all over the country. So not you have this, and you have the public outrage, and you have the mainstream media playing everything up, because it's a great story. This
is a good place where you can see the symbiosis between media and the government, and when they want to take somebody down. And I'm not worried about Enron. We're going to get into the Merrill Lynch defendants here shortly.
Yeah.
But you see some tie-ins with people. You see Michael Chertoff, who I think he chose the people to head the task force, and
he was
Michael Chertoff was at the Department of Justice, and he ends up after this becoming. A lot of people did a lot of bad things in this trial and put some innocent people behind bars, and Michael Chertoff is one of the first who actually gets promoted. He becomes the first head of the Homeland Security Department that newly created after 9/11. But all the people involved in this travesty of justice, they all get promoted, except for the man at the beginning of Sidney's book who commits suicide because he knows he's about to be hung out to dry.
Right. And Michael Chertoff, he chose Leslie Caldwell to head the task force because she was extremely well credentialed, and she was known as a terror as a prosecutor. I want a terror as a prosecutor when you're prosecuting Jeffrey Epstein.
Yeah.
Funny how that never happened. So then Caldwell handpicks her team of Ivy League pit bulls. So now you're on the brink of, you've got this task force that's investigating Enron, and then you've got everyone at Enron is running scared. Okay, so you've got this guy named Cliff Baxter, who he had been subpoenaed by Congress to testify. And he had left Enron like 6 months before all this went down because he saw the writing on the wall. He didn't like what Enron was doing. He knew that they weren't doing right, and he had left. But now he was being subpoenaed by Congress. And how interesting that not long after he'd been subpoenaed by Congress, he's found like at 2 a.m. in a busy, not a busy, but like a main intersection of traffic at 2 a.m. He had committed suicide. None of his family, even to this day, thinks that he killed himself. Everybody around him says he didn't do anything wrong.
Yeah.
So I'll always wonder if he wasn't Seth Rich.
Yeah.
he had information about stuff, and
it's another episode of Congress going after some. Why did they subpoena him? Where were the subpoenas for the banks and the pension funds that fed the Enron monster?
They subpoenaed this dude that had left 6 months before it went down, and he left. From everybody that they talked to, he left the company because he didn't like what they were doing. Leslie Caldwell, though, who she was along with her colleague Andrew Weissman. Andrew Weissman considered himself a god among prosecutors because he had helped convict mob bosses, and he had, through all the trials of convicting the mob bosses, he had developed these techniques of going after people, and that was when he honed his skill of intimidation and all these things. Whatever, the ends justified the means.
Yeah.
That's who he was.
Withholding Brady material. And
here's another interesting thing about what happened. Okay, so within 9 weeks of indictment, they had tried and convicted the venerable accounting firm Arthur Anderson within 9 weeks of indictment. Now, you've got Jacob Schwartz up there in New York, where he was found with the child porn. He enjoyed watching little baby girls raped. We just recently had that.
He was an aide in the de Blasio administration.
Right.
So he got continuances for almost 2 years. So now he's found a hearing, but he still goes free from the courtroom to appear at a later date. So he actually hasn't still served time.
Right. So
over 2 years.
When the government wants to do something like rapidly, fast, they can do it. Arthur Anderson, was the accounting firm. It was one accounting firm for Enron. So you've got financial institutions. You got tier 1, tier 2. Arthur Anderson was tier 3. And I was just telling Lou earlier that I think they went after a tier 3 accounting firm because they knew they could bully them. You're not going to go in and bully like JP Morgan or Chase Manhattan. But they chose to go after Arthur Anderson. And actually Arthur Anderson was on the more conservative side of things. They didn't like a lot of what
people don't know the way Arthur Anderson worked, but it wasn't just some massive corporation. It was a bunch of partnerships.
And they've been in business for like 85 years. They had
85,000 employees.
85,000 employees.
Who had nothing to do with Enron. And even the guys at Arthur Anderson in Houston didn't do anything wrong.
Right.
But that's what they indicted the whole firm.
Right. And Anderson, so you've got the grand jury. You've got the grand jury, and that's when you can present evidence. And the grand jury is heavily weighted towards the government side of things. I don't know if people know that a defendant, a person that's being charged, there's not even an attorney for the charged in there. It's specifically the government side of things. And so Anderson had requested an opportunity to make a presentation to the Enron grand jury before it considered the indictment. But Leslie Caldwell and Andrew Weissman and the rest of the task force had refused the company and was indicted on whatever evidence those prosecutors secretly presented. It was unfair from the very beginning. It was just a presentation. They wanted to present something to the grand jury that would counter what the government was saying, and they wouldn't even let them do that. And that's another thing. Leslie Caldwell and Andrew Weissman, they indicted the whole company. They knew that when they indicted the company that was going to be the end of the company.
Yep.
And George Bush and all of those guys, they knew that too, because behind the scenes there were talks going on about how could they lessen the blow for the markets, because they knew this was going to cause a problem. And so they were trying to prepare for the
demise of Arthur Anderson.
Yeah, of this great company, when they could have just gone after the people they say did wrong instead of the company as a whole. So Anderson, the whole thing with Arthur Anderson, what the government was saying is that Arthur Anderson destroyed documents, that it was wrong to destroy documents. And actually, there was nothing wrong with what they were doing. There wasn't a statute that said they had.
Because they didn't have subpoenas. There was nothing telling them they had to preserve documents at the time.
They were doing just what they have always done.
They were doing company policy.
And then And then what they did was, and this is what Sidney Powell said, is they created a crime by taking parts of two different statutes and piecing it together to make a new crime. And so then when it came to the jury instructions, and this is how these convictions were overturned, they changed the jury instructions, which is very rare. They took the criminal intent element out of it. They said you didn't have to have criminal intent to convict, which is interesting because that's with Hillary, that's how Comey exonerated Hillary was, he said he could not find any criminal intent. Yet here they convicted this Arthur Anderson by saying, you didn't have to have criminal intent.
Yeah. Just remember that Weissman is in control of a lot of this from the very beginning. This is Andrew Weissman, a lot of same tactics in the Mueller probe. And remember, Weissman wrote the Mueller report.
Yeah.
And he's been a right-hand man of Mueller's for a long time. And we've gone into other episodes of Mueller's leniency with pedophiles in the past.
Oh, he's had that going on since the beginning of his career.
Since the 80s. And so you talk about Weissman, he ran Obama's fraud section of the Department of Justice while the Uranium One stuff was going on with Hillary, and Mueller is actually involved in that as well.
Right.
And all these attorneys and all these prosecutors that worked on that task force, they got promotions, even though all their stuff was thrown out.
Yeah, so they had like 30 convictions, all of whom were overturned in whole or in part. And then after that, they're promoted. And whenever you see them written about in mainstream media articles, they always talk about them being the ones that went after Enron.
The indictments they got.
But it doesn't talk about
how
all of them were overturned in part or in whole.
And some of these went to the Supreme Court, and the Ted Stevens one too, and some of these from Enron went to the Supreme Court, and they were overturned at the Supreme Court, and these were 7-2 and 9-0 votes.
Right.
This wasn't 5-4 votes by a divided court with liberals and conservatives. It was unanimous in one case and 7-2 in others.
Right.
The Supreme Court saw how bad it was.
Yeah. So they can pick and choose who they go after. So the Enron task force went after banks that had done business with Enron, but not tier 1 and tier 2, but tier 3. And in 2003, the task force was replenishing and beefing up its ranks. So September 2003, the task force added Catherine Ruemmler. Catherine Ruemmler was then a prosecutor in the DOJ, and she was striking, blonde, with a well-known passion for expensive Christian Louboutin red stiletto heels. She was known for that. It's just like, she fancies herself some celebrity who works for the government. All throughout the Enron case, you saw that it seemed like the judicial branch sided with the prosecution. It looked to me like there was collusion going on between the judicial branch and the prosecution.
And the media.
So they were convicted. Arthur Anderson, within 9 weeks, unbelievably fast. It was appealed to the Fifth Circuit, which the Anderson conviction and horrible jury is. Anderson wisely decided not to retry it. What they decided they were going to do is appeal to the Supreme Court. And then Jim Brown. Okay, now we get to the Merrill Lynch people. Merrill Lynch, I guess they were another tier 3.
Tier 2, tier 3. They were smaller than the other brokerage houses. Okay,
so now you get to the person who eventually Sidney Powell represented in helping to appeal all the way to the Supreme Court successfully. Jim Brown. So he worked for Merrill Lynch. And so here's what Jim Brown got in trouble for. Okay, Merrill Lynch. Okay, let me go back. Enron was requested help from the U.S.
State Department
to supply 3 barges, which would supply energy to Nigeria, off the coast of Nigeria. And so our government requested that Enron do this. And so Enron went to Merrill Lynch. They wanted Merrill Lynch to buy these barges. Okay, Merrill Lynch, being on the more conservative side of things, did not want to get involved in this, but through, Enron was very aggressive in everything that they did,
Everything
and
they
they
did.
finally convinced them to do that with the agreement that Enron within 6
Was
months would
going to
do
market to somewhere else so that
Yeah.
it wouldn't be holding them.
right. So Jim Brown, this Merrill Lynch executive, what he was convicted of and went to jail for, was it 2 years? I don't remember how long. It was 2 years. There was a phone conversation between Merrill Lynch executives and Enron where Andrew Weissman, Andrew Weissman says, or the Enron task force said that his understanding of this conversation, this 5-minute telephone conversation that he wasn't even on, he was convicted of lying and obstructing justice over his perception of what this phone call was about.
Yeah. That he deprived Enron
of
the honest services
of Andrew Fastow, which if you understand Enron, Andrew Fastow was the ringleader as far as he was the
guy cooking the books and moving stuff around. That's why he was doing the barge thing, because at that time they needed the barge stuff off of their books.
Right. So when Sidney Powell took over this case, and she's reading about everything, and she said, so Jim Brown had a New York lawyer who was, I knew New York lawyers had no chance of winning a case like this.
New York lawyer tried this criminal case of
a New York banker in Houston with a Houston jury, and she was like, she knew it was doomed from the get-go. So Brown had voluntarily, in front of the SEC and the grand jury of the bankruptcy examiner, he had testified, and he was sure that if he had just told the truth, everything would be fine. And so that's another thing I want to talk to you guys about is Jim Brown is just a guy like you or I. He's a financial consultant. He had a family. Everybody in his community loved him. And he trusted the government. He trusted our system of justice. And he thought, okay, I'll just go and testify.
I'll go tell the Justice Department everything I know.
So he goes, and then not long after, boom, he's indicted with, first counts 1, 2, and 3 of the one they made up, where they piecemealed two statutes together to make a new crime, and then perjury and obstruction. And they came up with perjury and obstruction over that phone call, which he wasn't even on. And Andrew Weissman says in court, he wanted him to testify to the grand jury as to what his understanding was. So here's the deal on the phone conversation of between Enron and Merrill Lynch about the barges that Merrill Lynch reluctantly agreed to go in on. Weissman was saying that what they had done was Enron had promised them that they would either find a buyer or they would buy them out, which that would be illegal. And so that never happened, which you'll get to see later, is that when the government was withholding exculpatory evidence, Brady material, that would show when it was directly opposite of what the government was arguing and saying.
They knew the whole time that what they were arguing was not right. They knew it.
Right.
Going in.
Anyway, so I didn't put these in the notes, but when Jim Brown I don't know how they had heard of Sidney Powell, but anyway, they had, Jim Brown's been convicted. He's not in jail yet. He's awaiting sentencing. They're not going to appeal to the Fifth Circuit or whatever. They're going to go to SCOTUS. They want new representation, and so they called Sidney Powell. And Sidney Powell says when she went up there to visit, when you have a group of, powerful people, you think of these financial consultants, or especially these people in New York, you're going to have a bunch of alpha males. I remember reading in the book where Sidney Powell, where she walks in and she's struck by how she's probably got more testosterone in that room than all of them put together, that they seem like just a bunch of beaten down.
They were beaten down.
And you can imagine that. Imagine that you're innocent and you believe in the justice system, and you think if I just tell the truth, that I'll just tell the truth and everything, and every step of the way
That
they just
it's
keep, and
coming down
finally
on you.
it's there's this realization that everything's not going to be okay. And so anyway, Sidney Powell, she's been a U.S. attorney for like 10 years, so she knows the judicial system and how they operate inside and out. And she doesn't usually take private cases unless, thanks for sharing. She doesn't usually take private cases unless she believes in their innocence, and she believes in it. So she took on this case, and she's gotten all the records. And she's like a 2-person law firm. She had delivered to her law firm 800 boxes,
And
two trucks. And so she's going through all of the documents, and what stuck out at me was she's reading through everything. She cannot find the criminal offense alleged in the indictment. So you've got the indictment, what they've been charged with, and here's Sidney Powell, who's been a U.S. attorney for 10 years, and she can't figure out what law that they broke.
A U.S. attorney can't figure out what law they broke.
Nothing was clear about the alleged crime in this case. So anyway.
And the judge Wehrlein, he was just horrible in this case. Just
Yeah,
seems like he was in.
Well, when you read about it, you see throughout it that there's clues in there, that tips in there that clue you into the fact that there was collusion going on between the judge and the prosecution. Andrew Weissman had told Jim to share his personal story, his understanding with the grand jury, whether it was accurate or not. So here, Andrew Weissman says, whether it's accurate or not, tell us what your understanding of that 5-minute phone call was. And he does, and he gets indicted. Andrew Weissman knew right then, I think, that he was going to indict him.
Oh, he knew. Just like McCabe telling Flynn, no, you don't need a lawyer. We're just coming by to chat.
Well, yeah, because he was that was a formal interview, and he didn't even know. And he advised, and he actually told Flynn, no, you don't need representation.
That gets into the 302s and stuff. 302s here.
And so here's something that happened in the Ted Stevens trial. It was long before the trial began, the defense attorneys repeatedly asked for Brady material. Judge Wehrlein either did not rule on their motions or denied them. Prosecutors claimed they had no Brady material. As you'll see as we go along, there was so much Brady material, it's not even funny.
It was on discs.
Weissman, so on the first day of trial, this is with Sidney Powell, Weissman sat in the front row with his arm around the Houston Chronicle reporter, Mary Flood. And I think that's something that you have.
Is that a message to the jury and the defendants?
Or I just think it's indicative of the fact that the left and the DNC, they're all in bed with the mainstream media. I mean, that's who first reported on that fake dossier, from the Trump Russia.
Yeah.
And that's another thing. Andrew Fastel, originally at Enron, the treasury of Enron was this dude named McMahon. And McMahon was on the up and up. He didn't like what they were doing. And he actually went to Skilling about it, thinking that he would back him up. And instead, Skilling removed him and sent him to run one of Enron's other
little subsidiaries,
Enron networks or something. And he replaced him with a younger protege who would be more
susceptible to all the.
And that dude's name was Michael Copper. And he had destroyed his computer to keep the government from finding evidence. This dude wasn't charged with anything.
I think he went to the Hillary Clinton school of destroying hard drives.
Also, he stole millions. He wasn't required to pay back.
Sweet deal.
Yeah. So after they got a conviction on that, prosecutors were high-fiving each other. And here's something you see here, like with Paul Manafort. So there was a guy named Ben Gleason. Ben Gleason was he was one of the executives at Enron. I forget what his actual position was, but Ben Gleason was guilty. He wanted to plead guilty, and he wanted to just do his time and get it over with. But Andrew Weissman had different plans for him. He wanted Gleason to rat out the others, and Gleason didn't want to. So what did Weissman do? He had him thrown in solitary confinement in a dangerous prison. I can't remember the name of the prison, for like 2 weeks. And then when he came out, what do you know? He was ready to give him what he wants. So the Enron prosecutors created this new crime pieced from 2 different statutes pieced together. And so in order for them to convict these people, they had to get the jury instructions changed. And so what they did was they expanded a broad definition of conspiracy, which requires an agreement beyond all prior boundaries, by adding agreement or understanding. And they removed the criminal element. You didn't have to have a criminal intent.
Yeah.
So then, of course, the jury could convict.
You just had to have an objective.
Yeah. All you had to have was intended to accomplish an objective.
So then that's called a conspiracy.
So Sidney Powell
conspiracy, which has turned into a bad word for a jury about to decide Ben's fate. When conspiracy, when you look it up, it's just it's a plan.
Right.
It doesn't mean it's illegal, but they manipulated the jury as well. And of course, the jury was full of Houston people who most of them were probably victims of the Enron collapse.
Right. And these Maryland executives were being charged with making a decision. The prosecution was told the world that they didn't have the authority to make. More than 100 people had written letters of support for Dan Bailey, one of the, was he Merrill Lynch or Arthur Anderson? Arthur Anderson. And the judge did not even read it. They asked the judge if he had read them, and he acted like he did. So I don't think he read any of them. Can you imagine, like, you have these people that will write letters on behalf. You usually have,
you should be reading them.
10 would be a lot. This dude had 100.
Yeah.
Can't be bothered.
And so during the Verline sentencing hearing, government brought in Gleason, who was sent to that horrible prison, who admitted to having stolen $1 million for himself from Enron, and the government viewed him as worthy of a deal. And after solitary confinement at a horrible prison, he was ready to, tell them what they wanted. Okay, so the judge sentenced them to 30 months. Matthew Friedrich is one of the prosecutors. He's a bad dude. Catherine Rumler, she's the red stiletto heels. They were outraged that he only got 30 months. And so they leapt to their feet and objected. And prosecutors wanted defendants to serve 14 years and preferably 30. So I want you to think about that in light of Jeffrey Epstein, child rapist, who he got, I think it was 2 years. He served 1 year. But if you count all the time he was left out on the work permit.
He slept there. He slept at the jail.
So they were outraged. So we have our government who was outraged that these people they had created a crime for only got 30 months out of their life.
And Rumor's one of the ones that the Stiletto Hills lady, she ends up gradually moving up in the Justice Department and ends up as Obama's legal counsel to the White House. She just moves up and up. They all did. They all got promotions after this.
So they've got all these convictions, and now some of the Enron convictions had gone to the Fifth Circuit. I think the Fifth Circuit had overturned
the Fifth Circuit upheld a lot of it, and the Supreme Court is the one that reversed most of it. The Fifth Circuit, they were trying to understand how the Fifth Circuit could uphold some of this stuff.
Yeah, so now they're going to the Supreme Court. And when they get to the Supreme Court, this is where Sidney's representing the Merrill Lynch. And Justice Scalia is he says, what did that mean?
Talking about the twisting of the law to cram Anderson's conduct into elements of the crime or witness tampering.
He says possible investigation, potentially
because then they had
relevant.
distorted the jury instructions to convict Arthur Anderson.
And he's asking, what did that mean? So if you go to the page 121 in the 4th and 5th paragraph, so picture this. So Sidney Powell is at Supreme Court. Scalia is asking questions. Justice O'Connor, starting with the 4th paragraph on 121.
I might start a little earlier because Justice Scalia took another swipe. Well, it would be prohibited to tell somebody to do it. He said that's right.
but you could do it. The doing of it is perfectly okay. Doesn't that seem strange to you? Because he's saying that you can do this thing, but if you tell somebody else to do it, then
That's
it's
wrong.
illegal. He tried another tack. Dreeben was the attorney trying to uphold the verdicts. It seems strange to Congress, too. And when this case threw a spotlight on that omission in the statute, Congress didn't react. Dreeben walked right into that one. Scalia brings him up short. I would suggest that it throws a spotlight on the fact that your theory is wrong. The courtroom broke out in laughter. Scalia continued, it doesn't make any sense to make unlawful the asking of somebody to do something which is itself not unlawful, so that the person could do it. But if you ask them to do it, you're guilty. He's not guilty. And that is weird. Laughter breaks out again. Scalia tries again. Well, let me ask you about this precise thing. Is it Mr. Duncan? If he had himself shredded the documents or destroyed them, that was perfectly okay at the time it was done. Justice O'Connor interrupts. Is that right? And the attorney trying to uphold it answered it wasn't prohibited by this statute. This is such a ridiculous argument that Justice O'Connor wasn't sure she heard it correctly. It would not have been a violation? Dreeben said, that's right. So now he had lost Justice O'Connor, who was clearly appalled. But the government got the conviction, got him to plead guilty, apparently on the basis that if he asked somebody else to do what was perfectly lawful for him to do, it would violate the statute. Dreeben said, that's right, Justice O'Connor. An attorney that's actually good enough to get before the Supreme Court and argue before the Supreme Court just agreed with the premise that from this statute that they were trying to create, if I do something myself, it's not illegal.
But if
I ask somebody else,
then it's wrong.
It's illegal.
So that was a unanimous decision on that they reversed the four Anderson convictions were all overturned. And then it was after that Jim Brown, who is awaiting sentencing. His thing hasn't been overturned.
Yeah.
He's awaiting sentencing. Dude's a good guy. He gets a phone call in the middle of the night. His 20-year-old son has a car accident, flips off of a cliff. Anyway, he's on life support. They don't know what's going to happen with that. And when they appeal to the government for an extension, they give them 30 freaking days.
Yeah.
So they've gone after this dude wrongly, convicted him. He's awaiting sentence. Arthur Anderson just had all their convictions overturned.
And just on a quick side note, just totally sideways, this is the government we should give total control of healthcare to.
Yeah.
Because the government's so compassionate. The government will take care of you better than anybody.
Yeah, we'll give you 30 days. And actually on the Arthur Anderson, when that overturned that, I think that overturning that overturned counts 1, 2, and 3 of Jim Brown's.
Right.
So overturned counts 1, 2, and 3, but counts 4 and 5, obstruction and perjury, those were still left. Those were minor compared to those first 3. Though.
Yeah.
So that was actually good. Then the broadband division of Enron, there's 170 counts of conspiracy, wire and securities fraud, insider trading, and money laundering. The trial was so infected with prosecutorial misconduct that even the pro-prosecution Houston Chronicle began reporting on the problems. And 2 brave witnesses testified that the task force had threatened to indict them if they testified for the defense. So our government threatening witnesses that if you testify for these defendants.
And I believe that's witness tampering.
Yeah, that is witness tampering. Anyway, to make a long story short on that, 2 days later, the jury returned mixed verdicts and an inability to come to a consensus on the other ones. There were 0 convictions. So out of 170, 0 convictions.
Yeah. And then we get to...
Doesn't allege you. Sydney, I'm going to view the issue of the legal insufficiency of the gun. It doesn't allege a criminal offense.
And then we get to the original 302s. Now a lot of people are familiar with 302s now, which are the FBI's official records of their of their interrogations with suspects or whatever. And so some of these are with Michael Flynn going back to 2017. And we found out that some of those 302s were altered, changed.
They have found out that the FBI had destroyed the original 302s.
They destroy, FBI destroys evidence.
And
how do they get away with that? And here's, in this day and age, every one of you guys, you've got a phone in your pocket that has a high definition camera. You can record things. You can do so much. And you know, the NASA likes to brag that the computer power they had to get us to the moon is smaller than the computer power in the phone in your pocket.
Phone,
But today, still, the FBI does not record interrogations.
I think
they write it, and they do it on purpose because they can make anything they want to. Because then sometimes these guys fill out 302s, and they just put whatever they want, and they go, "This is the record of my
They'll do 302s,
interrogation."
but then they'll do summaries of the 302s.
Or they even edit. They edit the 302s.
Yeah. 4 weeks after, so Jim Brown goes to prison. It's over 2 years, and there's that whole ordeal where he's in prison. I mean, he was a broken man. He was the dude was not cut out to do prison time. But anyway, 4 weeks after Jim Brown was out of prison, Enron Task Force was awarded DOJ's highest award for exceptional service. So now, because those at the Supreme Court, those first 3 counts were overturned, there's going to be a retrial. There's supposed to be a retrial.
Yeah. But just soak that in. The Justice Department is awarding the prosecution team for heroic efforts stemming from a case that was unanimously thrown out by the Supreme Court.
Right.
And we're talking.
And they knew that. They knew that.
Everybody on that Supreme Court and everybody on here has different views about conservative liberal. The Supreme Court said this is terrible and threw it out. And then 4 weeks later, the Justice Department thumbs your nose at everybody and goes,
"Oh, here's an
these
award."
guys deserve. It's just like Dan Rather getting an award from all the media after he was drummed out of CBS for his BS reporting on
fake but accurate.
George Bush.
So in the middle of they still haven't settled Jim Brown's case. Okay, they overturned those 3 convictions, and there's still the 2 left, and the government is still coming after Jim Brown. Even after that, they've overturned the 4 Arthur Anderson. They've even overturned some of the Enron original, in part, some of those, because they reduced the Jeffrey Skilling and Andrew Fastos from like 24 years to like 14.
Yeah, they dropped them a bunch.
And so they're still going after Jim Brown. And in between that, you've got the Ted Stevens trial, which they convicted him of. And there's an FBI agent, Chad, who during the whole Ted Stevens, he saw what was going on. And he's an FBI agent that came forward and said, he filed a complaint with the DOJ Office of Professional Responsibility, and he said that the prosecutors had hid evidence. And so God bless this guy. I don't know where he is now. I don't know the story on him, but they never would have known what happened with the Ted Stevens thing. So that breaks open in the middle of this that's going on with Sidney Powell, because it involves some of the same people and some of the same tactics. So they're watching
with the Brady material.
Right. They're watching what's going on with it. So this is when they're going after Nicholas March, who I told you Nicholas March at the beginning of this Periscope was a U.S. attorney who had been at the get-go of going after Ted Stevens, who was bumped down to 3rd chair. But now the government is investigating what happened because of this FBI agent that came forward and said they hid evidence. And Marsh, as the prosecutor, had deliberately hidden specific evidence, and now the government's investigating that. So he feels, the wall's closing in on him, and he kills himself. And it's revealed that the prosecutor's own notes were exculpatory to the defense. So this is Judge Emmett Sullivan, Judge Emmett Sullivan is the one over
presiding
Flynn.
over Emmett Flynn right now.
So there's a packed courtroom, and they're waiting for they know all this evidence has come forward, and so they're just waiting for Judge Emmett Sullivan to dismiss the Stevens case. And I just want to say this: even though that they dismissed the Stevens case and they overturned it and all, the Stevens family had been slandered. He lost his Senate seat. The balance of power had changed in Congress. So it's not a win for the good guys, no matter how you look at it.
Yeah.
I'm glad that they found out what happened. Sullivan's statement's last paragraph on 209.
And this is Judge Emmett Sullivan.
Yeah. Last paragraph.
The judge was just getting started and he was livid. In nearly 25 years on the bench, I've never seen anything approaching the mishandling and misconduct that I've seen in this case. Before we hear from the parties this morning, the court believes it is important to take a few minutes to share some thoughts about what we are, as a legal community, need to do to safeguard the integrity of our criminal justice system. He had thought about this a great deal. He was extremely troubled by what he had seen. He spoke to the government's obligation to pursue convictions fairly and in accordance with the Constitution. When the government does not meet its obligations to turn over evidence, the system falters. He cataloged the government's multiple failures and excuses. They were the usual mistake, unintentional, inadvertent, or immaterial. He was especially rightly critical of the department's outrageous response to the FBI agent Joy's complaint of government misconduct. Not only did the government seek to keep that complaint a secret, but the government claimed that the allegations had nothing to do with the verdict and no relevancy to the defense.
They had everything to do with it.
That the allegations could be addressed by the Office of Professional Responsibilities Investigation, and that any misconduct had already been addressed and remedied during the trial. So that prosecutors are basically saying, you know, the fact that we withheld evidence has no bearing on this trial. And by the way, we've already punished those involved. So let's just get to the verdict.
So when the truth of the matter,
And so I mean, the
evidence was, it would have overturned.
But they're admitting that this happened.
Right.
The prosecutors admit this happened, but then they just say, well, this has no bearing. And it's just, and this, why this was never bigger news when it happened.
I know.
And now we know why, because the media is not going to.
So during the Ted Stevens thing, so 4 assistant U.S. attorneys and 1 FBI agent failed to disclose info. They were guilty of false evidence, manufacturing evidence. Prosecution used a series of rewards and threats to manipulate. But you know,
well, and
none of those have ever paid.
I also remember one of their main witnesses, the contractor himself.
Yeah. They
had stuff on him about possible I
don't think we're talking. So with Ted Stevens, the thing was he had hired somebody to do some remodeling or something.
And he didn't claim all the stuff on it on some forms.
And the government claimed it was like worth almost $300,000. It turned out to be it was only like $80,000. But as it turned out, nobody had ever lied about that.
No.
I don't know where the government
But
came
remember
out.
how they coerced that the one witness to lie?
Yeah.
Because they had a charge on him about he was contacting a minor.
Yeah, he had like skeletons in his closet, and they used those skeletons in his closet a lot to make him lie about Ted Stevens. So it was there that Judge Sullivan. Okay, so that was when Judge Sullivan appointed the special prosecutor to investigate the investigators. And it's funny how, even though that happened, page 30, last paragraph.
We don't know what happened with that.
Yeah. I mean, did anything?
And because he appointed that special prosecutor to go after the Justice Department prosecutors, that's how the book opens with that one prosecutor working on the case. He ends up committing suicide because he saw that those so-called wheels of justice were going to turn on him, what he had been doing to other people. He knew what would happen because he had been doing it. So the department allowed all the prosecutors named by Judge Sullivan in his February contempt order and this new order to retain counsel. On the taxpayers' dime, they all hired the best criminal defense attorneys in the D.C. bar. And remember, back in the Merrill Lynch, Andrew Weissman and company also coerced Merrill Lynch into not assisting their former employees whatsoever.
Right. They even got them to stop paying their legal bills. And that's another thing that Sidney Powell had said. So when they set up, they said, okay, we're going to investigate the investigators. And then all these people hired lawyers. And Sidney Powell makes the remark that everything was so incestuous, and the people that they hired,
The law firms involved in everything in DC.
are all connected in the swamp, and so she wondered how that would even turn out.
And it goes across both parties. It's not just
it's not a left or right thing. It's a swamp thing.
and that's the thing is when you get into this, the media reports, and they like to say how James Comey and Mueller are lifelong Republicans. That in the DC area, those are just those are stage names.
Okay,
When it has a D
Republican.
or an R behind their name, that's their stage name. They're all playing a part. It doesn't matter
they
what.
consider Anna Navarro and Jennifer Rubin as Republicans. So you've got I didn't
And
really.
this travesty happens under the George W. Bush Department of Justice. So to me, I mean, it seems to me that the Department of Justice
Part of
was
it was
just
under
as corrupt in the 80s or in the 2000s
right. And
as
then
it
the
is
Ted
today.
Stevens thing, it kind of carried on even to the Obama admin, didn't it? Or was that? I don't.
No, it goes into the Obama because right before they know that Sullivan's about to throw out this indictment, Eric Holder gets out in front of it and goes, "Oh, we're gonna clean the Justice Department up. We're gonna make it right."
He's the one that actually dismissed the Ted Stevens charge, and the only reason he did that is he knew Judge Sullivan was getting ready to dismiss it.
He was days away from dismissing.
He knew how bad it would look if Judge Sullivan did it versus if here's Eric Holder, new Attorney General. He comes in and he dismisses this wrongful conviction against a Republican. It makes him look good. So he got in front of it.
And he's trying to get his bipartisan bona fides in.
All right.
And actually, when people scream that they want bipartisanship, the bipartisanship is agreement on spying on Americans.
Yeah.
It's agreement on.
It's not what you think it is. So you've got Sidney Powell, and she's watching everything that happened with Ted Stevens and Supreme Court throwing out that, and she's watching all that, and at the same time, they just received was it a disc full of. Anyway, Sidney Powell gets a disc full of like 1,500 different. Anyway, it's a lot of information. She's getting a lot of the Brady material, but I think what happened here, they've got a new government, a U.S. attorney who wasn't involved with the original prosecution, who's come in and taken over, the retrial of Jim Brown.
Because they were going to continue it too.
So they give her this disc, and I don't think they realized what they gave her, because what they gave her was the task force had yellow highlighted Brady evidence before trial, and they gave it to Verline.
They gave it to the judge.
But they hid it from the defense. And many of the statements directly contradicted the prosecutor's entire case. And what they did was, instead of turning over this evidence back then, they gave them summaries. What they would do is they would write out summaries of the 302s, of the witness, the witnesses' testimonies, instead of giving them the actual
of Brady
evidence.
material, summaries of. And they just word it the way they want, just like the Mueller report is.
Just like when you got the Mueller report and you have like Mueller's summary, or you have the OIG, like when they had their OIG report, the summary versus what's actually in there, it's different. It's the same thing with this. Just give them the evidence, because the evidence is going to be what.
And what she talks about in the book is it would have been much easier for them to just turn over the material rather than try to go through and edit and do the summaries the way they did. It took more effort to do the summaries than it did just to turn over the material that they were supposed to be turning over in the first place.
Right. So she realized that Stokes had actually revealed something accidentally. Also in this was that 100 people had been named as unindicted co-conspirators. So this is something that the original defense attorney wouldn't have had. She wouldn't have known about those unindicted co-conspirators because they weren't indicted. So they indicted like tons of people as an intimidation tactic, you had that whole city like walking on eggshells, just terrified. You had them exactly where you wanted them. Just give us what you want, and we're going to destroy you. So anyway, they showed the judge whirling. They presented the evidence about the highlighting. And then Judge Verling, he had another script ready. And here's what what he did is he had another script ready where he named all these different cases that weren't even in this.
Which means that he had looked at all the stuff and said, I got to defend what I
Right.
didn't do. I got to defend that I knew that there was Brady material. I didn't do anything about it.
Page 361, FBI Director Robert Mueller announces Andrew Weissman. So after you've got all this, you've got all the wrongdoing of the Enron task force.
Weissman, by the way, jumped ship on one of these trials because he knew it was going to go south.
He saw that it was going to
out.
be overturned, and on the eve of that verdict, he retired. He left. But then he comes back when Robert Mueller becomes again
Special counsel.
This
FBI
is
director, yeah.
FBI director, and he appoints Weissman as general counsel and deputy director. Verify the Brady rulings. Second paragraph. Prosecutor provided mere summaries. That's the thing that Sidney Powell talks about in here is that the summaries of the 302s and the summaries of the witness statement that if you're a good attorney, you're just going to turn over the evidence. You're not going to create these summaries. So at this time, we're on the brink of Jim Brown being tried again. He's already done. It's been like 6 years since he got out of jail for those wrongful convictions, and they're talking about retrying him and sending him back or resentencing him on those two, the perjury and obstruction. So once again, the Brown family, and I don't think people understand. You've got this wife and 2 kids, and you've got this hanging over your shoulders. And here they are once again worried, is their dad, is her husband going to go back to jail?
To prison.
Because the government's still going after them. Okay, so what happens is, so this has been a 9-year ongoing thing. And finally the judge, they're on the brink of going, they're on the Friday night before the Monday retrial.
Yeah.
Stokes, the new government attorney, decides that he wants a continuation, a 30-day continuation. And Sidney Powell's like, are you kidding me?
We're ready to go to trial.
Now, what she did was she started talking to some of their witnesses and finds out they hadn't even talked to anybody.
Yeah.
They weren't prepared for
ready.
trial. So when they applied for the continuance, she went and filed, I don't know what you call it. She wanted to prove that they were not prepared for trial, and that's why they were asking for the continuation. And so they got called out, not